Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Linda H. Scruggs. I'm the co-executive director of Ribbon, here where we are the Gilead's HIV Aging Organizing Center in the U.S. Today, we're happy to bring you to you today a conversation on HIV, aging and addressing a double stigma. Ageism, that is like this really like new word for many of us who didn't even think that we would age. As a woman diagnosed with HIV for now next month to be 35 years, ageism is not something I thought that I would address in my lifetime, but it's something more and more I'm seeing, and I find that more and more my peers in the HIV community are having this added discussion around aging as well as HIV. I just wanted for a note to note that actually tomorrow is HIV aware. I'm not, excuse me, tomorrow is Ageism Awareness Day, is why we hosted this wonderful webinar today and acknowledges ageism is a problem, period, right? And we wanted to also bring up the fact that it in HIV is a challenge, period. For many of us, we know that ageism refers to how we think, whether it's a prejudice, how we feel, discriminate, how we may act or act towards someone based on their age. We know that often that's a negative impact. Many of us have seen it, whether within ourselves, possibly a partner, a friend, or even our parents or other loved ones that we may know have had this space. It also can create a lot of economical challenges. You know, for folks in our community, many people are re-entering into workforce in their aging space. Social Security for many of us is not enough sustainability financially. So some of us who have certain skills and information, we want to go back into the workforce, and we're finding this challenge. Some of us are being pushed out of the workforce because of our age in some spaces. So today we really wanted to highlight the intersection of HIV, aging, and stigma. So if aging by itself is hard, what does it look like when we started adding the layers of who we are as individuals? So that's what we're going to be doing today. I want to housekeeping, invite you to go into the chat, tell us who you are, tell us where you're from. If you would do that for us, that would be great, not required. If you want to shout out to anybody, you're welcome to do that as well. We also ask you to keep yourselves muted throughout the webinar. We will definitely open up for Q&A as we go forward, but I invite you to also to go down in the chat, make any comments, anything that you have there. The staff, even if you have a question, you get like me, sometimes you forget. That's that age space, right? Go drop it in the chat because we're watching the chat. I have part of our team here. Denise Drayden is with us. Shauna Cooper, Vanessa Johnson is with us from Ribbon today. We're going to capture you. I see you guys are in the chat already dropping in. Thank you very much. Let's get to this. Y'all ready to have a conversation? Our panelists are here. I have four wonderful associates, friends, loved ones with me today. Ronald Johnson is with me, Rebecca Denison, David Fawcett, and Manzana Bryant. We're going to be having a very, I would say, serious, intimate, but addressing some real challenges. And also hopefully looking at solutions or just sparking ideas is our goal for today. So I'm going to ask first, have our panelists come on board, introduce themselves to you. Let's start with Manzana. Come on up, Manzana.
Hello, everyone. How y'all doing out there? How you doing? First of all, I'm a trans woman of experience of color. I run my own nonprofit, which is T2Q, Trans Quantum Questioning. Our motto is, if you can feel it, attain it, and see it, then you can do all the quantum physics that you need to survive in this world today, being non-binary and being a trans person of experience. And that's pretty much it. Anything else? Just ask me questions. I'm an open book.
Great. Thank you, Manzana. I'm going to ask if Rebecca, if you would come and join us on screen and talk with us, introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning. Well, on the West Coast, good morning. Hello, everybody. I'm Rebecca Denison. I've been living with HIV for 42 years. I'm 62 years old, although I've read that HIV ages us by 13 years, so maybe my body is 75. I am in Berkeley, California, just a few blocks from where Kamala Harris grew up.
Damn,
I was
I didn't know.
yeah, I was diagnosed in 1990, looked for services for women, couldn't find what I needed, and started an organization called World in Oakland. Got pregnant in 1995 when that was controversial. Gave birth to twins who are now 28 years old, and married to my husband, who after 40 years is still HIV negative.
Wow. Thank you, Rebecca. I can't wait to hear some of this story. Come on up, David. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks so much for the invitation to be here and with these esteemed colleagues. My name is David Fawcett. I am living with HIV since 1988. I'm a gay man. I'm also a psychotherapist. So I really wear two hats in this conversation. I think personally, one is as a professional who really deals with a lot of clients facing this. The other is as an aging gay man. I'm going to be 70 this year. I'm starting to have some of those accelerated aging things. Like Linda said, I never expected ever to see this. And I'm feeling very personally some of the stigma that maybe subtle, sometimes not so subtle, but it comes at us. And from healthcare providers, from friends, from even family. So there's a lot to talk about, and I'm so grateful to have an opportunity to do so here in this forum. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Thanks. Our last speaker going to ask Mr. Ronald Johnson, please, to come on and introduce yourselves.
Thanks, Linda, and hello, everyone. My name is Ronald Johnson. I currently serve as the chair of the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus. I'm retired. I retired from working in public policy, specifically HIV public policy. But I continue to remain active through my caucus work and also working on HIV and aging issues. I was diagnosed in 1989, about coming up to my 35th anniversary in a few weeks of being diagnosed. And I am 76 years old. I think using Rebecca's measure, that makes me about 89. So yes, going well. And really appreciate this focus on ageism and the intersection of HIV and ageism and the various forms of isms that impact our lives. So thank you, Linda. Thank you, Ribbon, for giving us this opportunity.
Great. Thank you. It's my honor to moderate this group. So if folks see me smiling extra, it's nothing like showing up, hanging out with some friends who are aging. One of the things I want to ask us to start the conversation. So we're talking about HIV and ageism and this kind of double stigma. Give me a thought, like when you first got the email, so to say, and we started saying we're going to have this conversation. What are some of your basic thoughts around ageism and HIV? How do they connect? What stirs up with you? I'll start there. Rebecca, I see you smiling. I'm gonna come to you first then.
Well, I think the first thing that comes to me always, and anytime that I'm asked to speak, is how different all our experiences are. There are these threads that are very similar, and then there are the things that are very different. So, for example, I just spent the weekend at a retreat for long-term HIV survivors. And, you just even here in the San Francisco Bay Area, the experiences are so different. So you might have an aging gay man with HIV in San Francisco who's concerned about how who's going to take care of him because his biological family kicked him out when he was 13 for being gay. And then right across the bay, you have an aging heterosexual Black woman on dialysis whose family still expects her to cook and clean for them, you know,
Wow.
with a walker. And so, you know, there's just so many different ways that whatever our other aspects of our lives or identities are those additional challenges that are laid on top of it. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but that's just what I really noticed, how much we had in common, the stigma. We share the stigma, but the way that plays out in our individual lives really varies by a lot of other things.
No, I think you did answer that. That's absolutely beautiful. Who else want to tackle that one? Don't wait for me to call you.
Okay, well, I'll take that. Since she said diverse, in the trans community, older you get, you know, we have sex workers and we have our, you know, our cisgender women, we have our cisgender, you know, all women of color pretty much. And it's a very big impact, but we're getting older. And here it is, you out there, if you don't have the food you need, or if you don't have the medications you need for high blood pressure, hypertension, and I mean, which is the same thing. And, you know, and some people have like just homelessness with all that. So being 50 and above, because I don't want to disclose anyway, my age is 52, but anyway, being 50 and above, it comes with, by now in society, you're supposed to be stable. You're supposed to have that house. You're supposed to have that car. You're supposed to have that good job. Some people should be retiring. But because of the economy nowadays and how it affects minority and marginalized people, HIV is just one thing. It's just we doing better, we living better with HIV, but we also got to understand that we still people. We still have to live, we still have to eat, we still have to provide for our children if you have any. It's so much that just needs to be done. And only way we can do it is by us having these conversations and getting it out there. That's why I say I'm an open book. And thank you, Rebecca, for that, because you know, we needed to hear that, because it's just not you, me, it's many faces.
I want to just hold there with you for a second, Manzana.
Yes.
I know, so I have not always worked in the trans spaces,
Yes.
but I remember my entry into the trans spaces and the women talking about, you know, because of all the trauma that's in that space. So now I see my friends and loved ones in the trans space, they're celebrating getting to 50, right? So,
Yes.
and one recently in the conversation, she was saying, we don't have many models to see how to age as a trans woman into my 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I remember her saying that it's like, I see so many sisters having like these big celebrations because that's a community that this is new to. We've all been aging, but very uniquely in a trans women, trans space and non-binary spaces. Gentlemen, y'all been waiting. Come on, David. I know you have.
I just want to kind of build on that idea of trauma and as a gateway to the mental health stuff, and I see both the aging process and living with HIV as kind of parallel processes that have very, very similar things, including some of the emotional stuff that can happen, the anxiety, the depression, the PTSD that can happen to a lot of us, the isolation. And so all these things kind of are parallel. And I think when they come together with HIV and aging, it's kind of magnified or multiplied. I think that it's all the more intense. And I think in the face of a lot of stigma, for example, even from healthcare providers, a judgment about the sexuality and aging, you know, these assumptions, ageist assumptions about sex. I mean, all these things are coming at us in a way that are often misunderstood by providers and even friends sometimes. So I think we have to kind of constantly deal with not only the internal struggles that go with survival, if you will, but also kind of maneuvering through a world that's not always friendly or very helpful. I think that, and that the lack of resources can really impact us, whether it's financial, social support, connection, all of that is just hugely impactful. And I think it gets more difficult the more along this process we go.
Wow.
Linda, there's one other aspect of your question that I would like. Ageism has been manifested in how long it has taken us to get HIV and aging recognized and on the agenda. Looking at the names of some of the people on the call, I know that have been just for too long, voices in the wilderness. So I think one aspect of that is just sheer ageism, of not recognizing older adults in general, and those of us who were getting older and living with HIV is another aspect of the overall ageism issue. I think we've turned the corner a lot on that in many ways. Now we are talking about HIV and aging, but it was a struggle. And part of that struggle was driven, I think, by ageism.
Wow. I agree with you, Ronald. You also, let me ask you another question based on that, Ronald, because between you and David, we kind of also started looking into the healthcare spaces. I want to ask you, when you think about how does ageism impact the care and treatment of people living with HIV who are 50 and older? Because so now we're looking at this, how does that happen? What does that look like?
Well, I'll get started. I think first to say that the overall, the clinical care for older adults, and certainly older adults living with HIV, is still, I think, suboptimal and not adequate. And certainly too often, many of us living with HIV, aging with HIV, are not getting the quality care. Ageism, I think, does play a part of that. First, again, not giving priority to geriatric issues. For example, geriatric assessments in HIV clinics. We still have a way to go to get that part of the routine care. Negative stereotypes, I think, affect the clinical care. So I think that limits the recognition of depression among older adults, and giving priority to depression. Taking our issues of pain, chronic pain, seriously, I think is a part of ageism, of how we view people, and not giving attention to the clinical manifestations that stem from loneliness and social isolation, and all of these things that we as older adults experience either daily or at various times, but they're not given the kind of priority. I think too often we feel that we are not taken seriously, and I think too often we are just not taken seriously. And I think that stems from, in part, or to a large degree even, from ageism.
I love that, Ronald, and I love the layers that you talked about. And even I almost recently want to keep adding the isolation. We know isolation is a space, but I want to also, one of the things I'm hearing most recently is not just single people live in isolation. There are people who live in houses with people, with partners and other folks who are suffering or who are impacted by what isolation is, even if it's internal isolation, or there's some space that they can't be free in their engagement or their life with HIV. I want to add that as well. The chat is loaded. First, I want to acknowledge, guys, we see y'all in the chat talking about everything around. I love that. I think it was Sean said something around how we have to strengthen the strategy to strengthen to get people well, so to say, because it really is a social fabric. How do we help communities of persons aging with HIV do better? That's not my question. Manzana, I want to ask you a quick question about being over 50 and dealing with doctors. One of the things I just heard Ronald talk about, they're not taking us serious, right? So even whether in the trans spaces or in just human spaces, like how do we deal with that? And what mentally, what should we be doing, or what hope comes with our lives, so to say?
Well, I can just talk from my experiences. And just recently, I went to my foot doctor, and we had this quarrel, and she was asking me questions about, well, how can I get my trans individuals or my trans people and my non-binary people to understand that if they don't tell me everything about their diagnosis, I don't know what to prescribe. Because here it is, it's a medicine out there. I'm on a medicine. I take a medicine that affects my liver. She couldn't give me the other medicine because that also affect my liver. So her idea, and we both agreed not to give me that medicine because it'll destroy more of my liver because I'm already on the medicine. So my thing is be open with your doctor. Know within yourself that you're confident. I know it's hard for some people, but have your confidence for yourself. When you're trans and you walk in there, state your identity. Let them know who you are and what you want to be. First off, but just don't yell at them. You get more with you get more people with honey than you do with sour grapes. In other words, how I like to say it. But
That's a
going
southern way
in,
to say it.
there you go. But when you going into that doctor and and you're above 50 and they ask about your blood pressure, they ask about, well, are you feeling any weakness, any tinglings in your legs? Because the biggest thing now is diabetics and being HIV positive. Because what you have to understand is that HIV is always fighting to try to find something to pick at you with. And the reason I bring up the feet is because that's a bigger thing that we need to look at, because just the smallest little cut can get you an infection and the HIV will just thrive on it and multiply, no matter how much antivirals you take.
I love that, because that leads in just to comorbidities at period. So even as we're aging, our healthcare systems get more complicated. Our needs to navigate the healthcare system is much more complicated. I love that Ms. Turner said in the chat, we have to give more intentional, I'm paraphrasing Ms. Turner, more intentional provider education. Not just the MEs that they may get, but how it's like in touching real people as we're aging, their education that has to go into the provider world as well.
And a part of that education, Linda, is educating yourself. It starts with self first. You have to deal with self to educate yourself first, and then get all this knowledge that's given out there to you, and then present it to your provider. I know you're gonna have some pushbacks on some old heads. They set in their ways. But just stay firm, stay fast, and be nice.
But not always be nice. David, I'm gonna come to you for a second, David, because we're talking about provider space. I want to ask you about supports, right? So as people are aging, be it physical, emotional, or even spiritual, what might we need to do to maneuver to help folks around aging when it comes to that mental support or physical space?
Right. Such an important issue, because I think not only does HIV take a toll in ways we don't quite understand in the brain, but those of us who had, 1 or 2 T cells back in the day, have greater risk of other kinds of things going on, including dementia. So I think we have to kind of really be alert. And so far, I think the providers just haven't kept up. And I think we'd really like to see a central kind of geriatric specialty. I'm sure they maybe exist a few across the country, but somebody that really coordinates this. I myself have had a number of different things over the years, and our medical specialists are so siloed. I'm kind of the one trying to put it all together, because they're so specialized. They don't really make good referrals. They can't see the bigger picture. And HIV, there's so many systemic things that go on. So I think having a medical provider that really, almost like a medical case manager, but a doctor who can run coach on that. From an emotional point of view, I think that I just totally agree with what you're talking about, the isolation and the need to focus on it, because that kills. And it kills, and it doesn't have to be, like you said, single people. It can be isolation in a crowded space. But it's the internal mindset of, are we feeling connected or not? Connected, supported, encouraged. Do people around me understand me? Do they get me? Or am I just kind of it's a harsh word, like some freak, for some doctor to look at who just makes all kinds of assumptions about who I am because I'm living with HIV for so long. And I think just having a better understanding of us and people that really connect. But I know there's more and more research in all these different mental health spaces about the power of connection. And I think, so the old buddy groups we used to have back in the day, right, in the 90s, and those kind of things can really be helpful now to break that isolation. Like, part of it we can, and I agree totally with Manzana, part of it is us, right? What can we do on our own behalf? But I think also we can sure use some help putting it together on a community level, for sure.
I love that, David. I think when you made those last comments, I think about some of us who started this battle back when nobody knew what we was doing, right? So there was a period
Right.
that nobody really knew what we were doing. The providers, we all was learning it. And it goes to Manzana. We were bringing education. We were the owners of our decision, making decisions with our providers. I think we have to be our best advocates. I often find that many of us are great at fighting somebody else's fight, but then we become silent when it's our fight, right? Because I'll tear the walls down for somebody, but when it's me, that means I have to own that there's something happened or there's something that's quite not, it's just a different space when it's me. But I think we have to tap into that. I'm gonna go to Rebecca for a second with that, Rebecca, because I also, as you said, aging, you have beautiful daughter twins. I know them. How has this double stigma personally impacted you? And I'm gonna ask you, how are you responding to any parts of it?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many parts of it, but one of them is that we just weren't expected to still be here. We weren't expected to live this long. And so I don't feel like there was, everything was so much a crisis that a plan wasn't really made for what would happen if we actually did survive. So in my case, I outlived my first doctor died, which was absolutely devastating. I didn't expect to outlive her. My next doctor retired. My current doctor looks about the age of my children. So my own ageism shows up because I find myself being like, but do you have enough experience to be qualified to take care of me? And she's actually been wonderful. But the older I get, now I have, you look at the list of comorbidities, heart stuff, cholesterol, cancer, I mean, had them all. And so in the old days, if you found a great for me, when I found a great HIV specialist, I was good to go. But now there are all these other specialists that I need to work with. So as an example, when I started to get menopause, I went to see a gynecologist for the first time because I'm in the WISE study and I was getting pap smears every year. And I went in with 4 questions as a woman going into menopause. And as soon as before I even sat down, she said, I see you have HIV. How'd that happen? And immediately I'm putting this defensive place of like, are you trying to do that thing where my community gets sorted into the innocent victims and the people who got what they deserve? Because I'm not okay with that. I don't want to be judged on how I got HIV, regardless of how you feel about me afterwards. I never got to ask my 4 questions because I was so stunned. And when you're in a doctor's appointment, and especially a gynecology appointment, you're so vulnerable that it's really hard to advocate for yourself. I'm like you, Linda, like I can be scrappy for someone else, but it's hard to do it for myself.
I thank you. Thank you. I would love, somebody else want to respond to that. Like, tell me, because they're in the chat talking about how it shows up. I would use, I love that I'm not the best advocate for my own healthcare. I have to practice. I have to practice what I'm going to say and do before I go to the doctor. And I'm one of those folks, my smartphone is smarter than me. I have to write down the questions. Rebecca, you know that being in the GYN, I learned this from Dr. Anderson at Hopkins. When I go to the GYN, I need 5 minutes before I get in the stirrups. Because once I'm there, I'm in a vulnerable position. So we have to teach our doctors how to work with us as individuals. I think in ageism spaces, one of the things that I'm finding is like why you're still doing this. Like that like it's been a long time. HIV is one thing to tell somebody I work in HIV, but then it's this whole thing why you're doing it. Aren't you ready to retire? I'm hearing a lot of that, I'll stop for a second. Anybody else want to tackle that thought of how the double stigma is showing up in your life? I see y'all being silent. So I'm gonna ask Ronald one of these big Ronald's my big policy guy. Ron, I want you to think about, because one of the things I hear in the chat, I'm looking in the chat too, is kind of like we need to do something. We need a strategy. We need something, right? So what public policies are needed to address the intersection of HIV and stigma, discrimination, and ageism, right? So there's a broad, so what is it? What's going to change this? What do we need, or what could we be thinking about as those of us that are advocates to do and address? Because it hasn't been addressed. People have been aging with HIV since the beginning. But I keep saying we're kind of the baby boomers of HIV. We're the largest generation that ever was, and we're the largest generation we hope ever will be. So what policies do we need to put in place now to support the generations that are coming behind us?
I'll get started on that, Linda, and hopefully others will add. But the first thing that I would say is that, and you said it a little earlier, more intentional. We as advocates need to be more focused and intentional about the kinds of changes that are needed. And we have to get our policy makers, the decision makers, to be more focused and intentional. I think some of the specifics is we've said the need for provider education, and I think that needs to be part of governmental programs. The deliberate and focused training of our providers, both HIV specialists who need to be better trained in geriatric care, and geriatricians who need to be better trained in HIV care. But again, that there needs to be public policies at the and expectations that drive better education. Another one that I would cite is that we need, again, more intentional benchmarks for integrating HIV care and geriatric care, and the expectation that there would be more coordination needs to be part of the grants, the contracts that governments issue need to be built in. Those are some of the kinds of policies. But again, for me, the key word is intent, intentional, and that applies to both advocates and decision makers. This needs to be a high priority of our policymakers.
I love that, Ronald. And intent is like one of my favorite words in the world. I have it on probably every wall and every space I live. I want to ask us a question. So there's an elephant in the room for me. I talk about, and I know some of us are working on it. Some folks are working on it. And even to the, I dropped a question into the chat also about policy for folks who are on. I'd love for you to go in and also talk to us there. But what we haven't talked about is aging, right? We've talked about ageism and aging. There's an ageism space when I think about where am I going to spend the latter parts of my life, right? Who's going to take care of me? Are senior facilities prepared to take on people living with, because outside of my community, the stigma is still here, right? A couple years ago, I had to help put someone into a senior living space, and the person saw me on a commercial and found a reason to begin to ask very stigmatizing things. So even by association, what should we be doing now? Is that an advocacy move? Is that a research move? Because we're got to get beyond. I'm going to go for you first, David. We got to go beyond just surviving HIV, right? Because ultimately, we will get to a place where it probably for most of us won't be HIV to take us into our forever life, right? How might we begin to think about that, David? And how do we help people begin to face what is the other side of aging and those impacts that may come with it. I'm gonna go to you, David. I'm coming to the audience with some Q&A in just a few minutes.
Yeah, just such an important idea. And I think we're in a society where both aging and HIV are really undervalued, right? I think as we get older, we kind of lose visibility, we lose power, if you will, and we're not that important. And I think that's kind of ×2 with this population. So I think we have to speak up. I love what people were saying earlier about being advocates for us, because otherwise we kind of slip into this invisible state, or we're just nobody's paying attention. And there's such need, like you just said, how are we going to live? Who's going to take care of us? Where is this support going to come from? So I think advocating for us is really huge. But I think also, and this is again on us, to really start thinking about this shift of the survivor mindset into realizing we're all going to pass at some point. And I think to prepare for that, and it's something that's very unpleasant. None of us like to do that. But do we have our legal paperwork in order? Are those things kind of set? Are we shifting a mindset to sort of bring in maybe a spiritual element here? What's our belief about what's next? And how does that play a role? I think so far we've been so kind of just, I remember the day it was just surviving the next month would be important. And I think now, thank God, that's not so front and center in my life. But these thoughts about what's next, I think, are important to consider. And that requires both speaking up on our own behalf and also doing some internal work.
Right. I love that. I want to go to the audience for a couple minutes to get some Q&A, but I want the panelists also start thinking about what's next. So when we think about this aging space, if you think about in the next 3 years, what might we start be thinking about or start looking to shift? I know I saw Douglas had his hand up earlier. I want to invite Douglas, if you're still on, if you have a question, put your hand back up so we can get you into the queue. If other folks have a question, please raise your hand so we can identify you in this space. You have a question or a short comment. I know we're good on time, but I don't want to lose it, right? So, hey, Jules, the only answer is to understand every comorbidity. I absolutely agree with you, Jules. The comorbidities, like as we're aging, and not just HIV. So comorbidities are genetics, their behavior, and their disease, their medication. There are a lot of things that impact our comorbidity. And you're right. You can't wait till you get a diagnosis. We really have to be ahead of prevention, right? Comorbidity prevention spaces. I know folks, and I get mad at them. I get real mad at them, who's like waiting to go to the doctor to get the bad glucose test. Like, well, won't you slow down on the chocolate cake? Like, you can say that, but then there's a behavior, and sometimes there's some trauma, other traumas that go along with some of the behaviors that lead to these comorbidities. So even just knowing yourself is really important. Let me go in here. So Douglas was in the chat. He said, that's a tough question. Programs, I'm trying to sub-read in here. Right. Douglas is in the chat, guys. It's really talking about how we have to teach each other, people living with HIV, where to go, even on the internet, for medical information. What are the right spaces to go to? And that may be something that Ribbon could do. Maybe we need to put together some credible list of places to go. But I also invite you to ask your doctor, where did they go? Many medical providers will give you online resources to go to learn information. But I also, but I'll ask the panelists, where do you if you wanted to share? We're not giving out medical recommendations. We're just sharing information. Anybody want to tackle that? What might be some places that folks can go to get information on medical spaces?
Linda, if I could interrupt for a minute.
Yes, Doug, come on.
My husband is a doctor, is an MD, and one of the places he goes online, there's a website called Physicians First Choice. That gives, that's where physicians go to learn about people's comorbidities and stuff, and that's a place that we could go. Some of the language might be geared for physicians, so you may have to look up some of the words you don't understand, but it will give you a basic understanding of the comorbidity you have. Also, a lot of doctors are not educated in supplements. For instance, one of the best beneficial supplements people can take today is magnesium, and that solves a lot of their problems like headaches and energy problems and this kind of thing. Doctors are not taught that in medical school, and so these are things we need to learn on our own.
I love that. Thank you for that resource, Douglas. And I want to go back to Jules. I acknowledge Jules is in the chat, guys. Definitely NATAP has wonderful webinars, and often their webinars are very much medically focused. And we definitely invite you, Jules, if you could put the website in the chat, that would be great. Not taken for granted that everybody knows some of the very clinical spaces that NATAP shows up in webinars in educational spaces. Please do that. Also, one of the things I heard, I believe it was Ronald and David spoke to the geriatrician space and the shortage in the HIV community and focus. I love that Ribbon has some new partners, ASA, and that's who at Aging, the American Society on Aging, is the organization that started the awareness on Aging Awareness Day, one of Ribbon's new partners. And their webinar actually is tomorrow. I'll put their link in the chat as well as we go on. But I think that they're spending time in the HIV space and really looking, working with us to really look and identify opportunities and places to intersect around some of that geriatric care that really would benefit us. Geriatricians kind of went down in the field, my understanding, right? But I think HIV is going to give folks a new economical workforce opportunity for folks who want to gain and expand their medical skills. I definitely say that. I saw another statement. Don't forget to ask about doctors. All right, Sean was noting around doctors, around some of the longevity studies. We saw some pieces up here also around legislation around organ donations. You know, as aging people often need transplants, right? There's still rules that hinder people living with HIV from getting transplant donations. And even in some spaces, it may just be personal bias, isms, or why that can happen. Because we have had organ donation, but again, what is sometimes who's in control of clicking yes or no, whether or not that person is credible, or is they made the life decision, whether or not this life has enough things happening to make it possible. I love the fact also, one of the things I asked in here, who's been thinking about end of life spaces? I'll add in here, when we talk about organ spaces, are you as the panelist, have you started having any of those conversations? You know, do folks know you don't want to be on the left road to the third? Or I'll tell you, like my dad passed away. He was like, I want to be cremated. You can't get me here. And at no point do you hand me off to your mother because she won't let me go. Right? Like little things, right? We have to get detailed because somebody, you know, needs that information. Because if you ever had to be part of someone's end, you want to know what they want to know. So I saw you raise your hand, Rebecca.
Yeah, it's something I think about a lot, and actually it comes well before we pass, because we need to be identifying, you know, when my mom got to the point where she thought a credit card, she would confuse her phone for a credit card and her credit card for a phone, but she had been reluctant to sign over power of attorney. That makes it really hard for people to take care of us if we haven't made those arrangements ahead of time. So even before we pass, we may need people to help us. Or I had a friend who was in a coma, and we needed to figure out how to make sure that her rent was paid so that when she got out of the nursing home, if she did, she would still have a place to live. But nobody knew what the passwords were to get into her computer or get into any of her affairs to take care of her. So it's a really scary thing, I think. to turn over that level of information about your life to somebody else. But also, yeah, we need to think about how do we empower, if we are so lucky as to have people we would trust to help us, how do we empower those people to actually be able to do the job? So I actually just bought a thing. It was called a knock box, next of kin box. And so it's got all the file folders and worksheets to tell you exactly what you have to do. And I'm starting to work my way through that.
Yeah, I know we have a couple more minutes. Panelists, thoughts, talk to me. They ain't got no questions, so talk to me.
I think for me, one follow-up, and hearing Rebecca just triggered in me that, and I'll use myself as an example. I don't even know how to think about some of these issues because we have not been, and again, I'll speak for myself. I have not been educated on how to age. Period, let alone aging with HIV. And as some of the other panelists have indicated, we had to learn and advocate on our own. But we need, and this is I think a public policy issue, we need pathways of learning of how to age. I think it's part of the overall ageist culture that that preparation is not built in because we are such a youth-oriented and anti-aging society. But I think those are some of the things that we have to overcome, and we really need to get at as advocates, articulating the specific changes that we need to see happen, and to begin to hold our public officials accountable. How do we hold ourselves accountable so that when we are having an ageism discussion in 2025, we can say, this is what we accomplished over the past 12 months. But to do that, we need to identify those things and begin working on them. And I hope this kind of session will get us on the pathway of doing that.
Well, Ronald, you just gave me a charge for ribbon because I was sitting over here thinking, and you said it out loud. Maybe we need to work on an HIV and aging toolkit. You know, something to really, because again, so I'll talk about, there's a core part of our community is part of Ryan White, right? So we always talk, oh, there's an underserved community. Whether you're a part of an underserved community or not, often aging is not how to age, isn't a conversation. And what are the tips and tools needing to age somewhat, I don't want to use the word successful, or somewhat in grace, or some kind of organized space. So maybe maybe there is something we can use to figure out real tools, looking at our community and maybe talking with our community over the next year on what might be helpful. Because I think Rebecca said it earlier, we have different cultures, ethnicities, races. So maybe it is something we could say, hey, not many of us are having this type of conversation. So here, let's have some tips, like what's been working, or again, what has worked. Some of us have been with people who have aged with HIV, or just aged, right? I think that's one great takeaway from this space. I think another great space around ageism, I want to tell us, I know I'm going to give y'all some time back, but I want us the attendees to think about what happens when you see or you experience ageism, right? I want us to be aware of it, but I also, when you're aware something's happening, folks said, I never thought about ageism with HIV, right? So can we pre-think about how do we line that up in our already kind of garbage can with the stigma and all that other stuff, right? So now if we've had to put something else in that space that don't feel good, because anything that ends in ism don't feel good, right? So I want to say to the audience, what do we do? Now we have this new thing. How might you address it in advance? If you find yourself at the intersection or interacting with ageism, what might you do? And for my panelists, give me a last thought. What somebody might do if they're found in this space of the double stigma. So I think I started the day off with Manzana. I'm gonna go back to you right around. I see Manzana, I see Rebecca, David, and Ronald. What might we add value to the folks who are watching that they might need or to address if they find themselves in this intersection? Shauna's going to get me if I don't say it. She's been dropping the evaluation in that chat. I need y'all to do it because they're going to get me if I don't say it. Manzana, come on. Last thoughts, what might we be able to say to folks?
Well, first of all, we need more panels and discussions like this, first off. And we're going to need more policy in place. But when we talk about policies in place, at AIDS Watch, for instance, what we all do when we go to AIDS Watch, that'd be something for us to bring up at AIDS Watch. But we think about the bigger picture. We need to think about the local states. That's where everything is at now, is in your local community. You have to fight those local politicians first before we tackle the big politicians.
I love that.
But for the audience, what I think personally what needs to be done, what I try to do in my community, but it's only one little me, and I have like 47 counties that I do look over. So all I do is just stay fast, stay firm, and just keep preaching. That's all I can do. I mean, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. You understand what I'm saying?
You're
But
absolutely
more
right.
education is definitely needed, but we need to start with our local hospitals, our local doctors, our local churches. We need to get the churches involved because more people is more religious. And also a lot of social media, because that's where we catch our generation, millennials and all those. I'm ex myself, so.
Yes.
But that's what we, that's what we
Manzana's the
should do.
baby of the bunch.
I'm gonna be a lot of knowledge. I've been around a long time with it.
Rebecca, come on in. What might we say?
I mean, I think our whole country has never adapted to the fact that we gave women rights, and now we can't make 50% of the population take care of the elderly for free. We've never come up with a replacement system, in my opinion, that is actually effective. So like when we finally had to put my mom in a nursing home 2 weeks later, she had died of COVID within 2 weeks. But for us specifically as people with HIV, I think being part of a peer support network, and I was really happy to see some people posted their organizations and things that they're doing for peers. Because the first thing for us individually is you have to feel like you're not crazy. You have to feel like you're not alone, that what you are feeling and what you're experiencing is real, and that you have value as a human being, even if you're not the human being you were in your 20s. And like how people were talking about not being able to advocate for themselves, if you have other people who are true peer supporters, it can help you either have the energy or the ideas or the connections to get help. But it's so easy to isolate. And then when you isolate, you're trying to solve the problem on your own instead of having a whole group of people help you.
I love that, Rebecca. Definitely, as we're aging, if you feel like you're alone, I need you to find that one person who could be with you. Especially if you find yourself entering in healthcare systems, even in healthcare systems, there's a lot of stigma spaces, and having someone there to advocate when you can't, you have to do that in advance. You have to make sure you do that. David, I'm gonna go with you because I can go. That's a whole nother webinar.
Yeah, I kind of want to build on what we just heard, but I think the policy is important, obviously, but I think we also need to start with us. And I have discovered, and this is what I encourage people to do, is just to create spaces where we can talk to each other about this. I think if there's no opportunity to talk about, I mean, this webinar, right? But at a local level, to talk about even my friends, this doesn't come up when we're going out, and who wants to talk about this, right? So I think just to set a place where we can feel comfortable to talk about it and really start to feel like we're understood and we can be there for other people. That building of connection, I think, is really healing for us in a big way.
Come on, Ronald.
I would follow what David, Manzana, and Rebecca have said, and the theme of speaking out and calling out when we are confronted with that intersection of ageism and HIV stigma, and we need to be empowered to speak up, speak out. And we all have varying degrees of how to be bold, how to be proactive, and that's fine. But the point is we have to get ourselves on that continuum. We cannot be silent. We cannot internalize the ageism and the stigma, which we have all been doing. I mean, I know I internalize some of the phobias and stigmas, but we have to be empowered. We have to empower ourselves. We need to demand government to create programs that enable us to be empowered. There are many things we can do, and we all have varying capabilities, but there's a role. We are over 50% of the population of people living with HIV. That's going to grow to 70% and more in some localities. It is already. We are not a small group, and we don't need to be a silent majority. We need to be a bold, active majority.
Wow, this is so powerful. And thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Some of y'all, I want you to just drop in the chat because I got programs, my staff gonna be mad. Ribbon's gonna do a focus group, 2 of them, one on HIV and aging and one on preparing for the end of life. I'm charging my team. We're gonna drop in the chat to say, I'm in. If you want to be part of that, drop in the chat, say I'm in, so we'll know who to contact. We got you, Manzana. Everybody, this has been fabulous. Please complete the registration. Drop in the chat, I'm in. We're going to contact you because I hear us having a discussion. And that won't be far. So you're going to hear from us probably by the top of November to host a couple of small little segments to start the conversation. Ronald Johnson told us to do it. When we come to you next year, we're going to be talking about what we did, and we want to do it with you. Thank you for sharing this time with us. Always, please visit us at ribbon3.org or rock4aging.org. Either one of them, you can find Ribbon Space. We love to hear from you. I think we have another webinar next week. You'll get if you haven't seen it, we'll use this registration list to make sure that you have it. Again, thank you. We look forward. Panelists, I can't do nothing but keep loving y'all. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye, my dollars.
Oh, wow. Great. Bye, everybody. Be well. Be well.
Hi, Linda. Great to seeing you.
Ditto. Be well, folks.
All right, Linda, I enjoyed that.